both of the authors. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll gather them up and have this time towards the end for you to be able to ask. And we'll have a 5-minute break about 8:15, so that you can go and get another cup of tea or anything else you fancy doing in 5 minutes. So just to make sure that we're all able to enjoy the evening. So let's make a start. Welcome to Sarah and to Michaela.
Thank you.
Sarah's going to do some readings for us first and tell us a little bit about her recent book of poems, Thérèse.
Snap. Okay, I'm more than happy to start. How lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Miranda and Matt, for organising, Michaela for reading with me, and everyone else for coming. It's been a really lovely thing to look forward to, actually. So thank you. I'm Sarah Law, and I'm speaking to you from London, in a flat where I've spent plenty of time over the last year, as you can imagine, and very pleased to be talking about my poetry collection about Thérèse, which came out at the end of last year, but has been the subject, I suppose, of thought and reflection for many, many years, and slightly more concentrated thought and reflection over the last few years, 3 or 4 years perhaps, and I'm happy to talk about that and what inspired it later on. So I'll normally, when I have given talks and readings from the book before, I've sort of given a fairly substantial introduction to Thérèse's life, because she's not that well known perhaps in the general poetry reading population, but I'm wondering if that's just a little bit redundant here, as people are part of the Society of the Little Flower or otherwise informed about this reading. So I'll give a brief introduction, and then I'll go on and read some poems, and we'll see how we go. So Saint Thérèse obviously is someone who is very much loved in Catholic and wider Christian circles, and wider than that too. But it is a paradox, even why this is the case. So born in 1873 and died in 1897, having been a Carmelite nun in the Normandy town of Lisieux for just 9 years. So a brief, constrained life by worldly standards, and yet, from another perspective, a very full and very profound life given to love, and the expressions of love, both lyrical and practical. She was also a writer, best known for her autobiographical memoir, of course, The Story of a Soul, which she wrote at the request of her religious superiors and finished just a few months before her death. In addition, she wrote poems, plays, hundreds of beautiful letters, and some of my poems come from reflecting on specific moments of Thérèse's life, which she described herself. Others are inspired by some of the really wonderful photographs of Thérèse, many of which her own sister, the artistically very talented Céline, took after she too became a Carmelite in the Lisieux convent. Many of the photos are well known. I'm really delighted. Just a few of them will be shown while I read this evening. And I'm also very delighted that I managed to get some featured in my collection as well. So some of the poems are set alongside the photographs that inspired them. That's a very, very brief introduction. Of course, you also don't really need to be told that Thérèse is sometimes known as the Little Flower, because we're here courtesy of the Society of the Little Flower. She loved nature, she loved flowers. She always considered herself akin to a humble part of nature's designs, a little flower, elsewhere, a little bird. But she didn't just turn to nature for her insights, and that's one of the things that really touches me, actually, when I think about her life and her writing. And I'm actually going to start with a poem not about a flower, but about an elevator. Because one of her most ingenious analogies for divine love is that of the lift, the elevator, which of course was brand new technology for her time, holding and lifting people in the way that Thérèse felt God held and lifted souls who loved him. So as far as we know, the inspiration for her use of the elevator as a symbol of God's love came from the time when she was on pilgrimage to Rome with her father and with Celine, her sister Celine, on the way to Rome to appeal to the Pope to let her enter the Carmel at her young age of 14, as she then was 15, as she became. But they stopped at Paris and stayed in a hotel with arguably the first elevator that she encountered. So this is a poem that I wrote about that, and it's called L'Ascenseur, or the lift, the elevator. Paris, 1887. Thérèse is there with Papa and Céline on pilgrimage. This is a worldly interlude, the Louvre with its risk of colour and flesh, and afterwards the Galerie, where Papa buys his daughters Parisian raincoats, blue and chic in the tinted glass. Céline is drunk on art, sees the blur of life around her as a palette to be dipped in. Thérèse thirsts for God. She wants to be alone in her poor heart's chamber. Back at the hotel, the girls take the elevator. Each feels the pit of her stomach lurch. Céline imagines that this is what love does. Thérèse, as the lift ascends, understands love. Thérèse entered the Carmel in 1888, and yes, a lovely photograph there. The day before she did so, a portrait photograph was taken by the local photographer, Madame Besnier, and it does remain one of the best known. It's a beautiful photograph, and I've got it on the cover of my my collection as well. So this is a little poem about that photo. So April 1888. Madame Besnier takes the portrait 3 short days before she enters. She is 15, her tresses twined up in a bun. Her blue dress hugs her body in a way she will forswear. Her demure, her face bright. Later, Céline will slim her spine with artist's gouache to an arch, tighten her image to sanctity's pattern, like and unlike the Thérèse she knew. Thérèse herself looks straight ahead, smiling at the camera's examen and the dark veil that surrounds it. Céline took so many beautiful photographs of Thérèse, and she also adjusted quite a few of them, and she did her own drawings to try to make Thérèse look more acceptable as a saint, as was regarded in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. And that's one of those photos she adjusted it slightly, but Thérèse's expression remains. So once in the convent, Thérèse had to find new ways to express love and kindness and care. And in spite of various indulgent gifts from her family, from her father, she struggled with the austere way of life. And I can't think of anybody who wouldn't. Particularly, she struggled with the severity of the prioress, Mère Marie de Gonzague. And I just touch on this in the following poem, which is inspired by a photograph of Thérèse as a novice. which I think is coming up on the screen. There it is. So this one wasn't taken by Thérèse's sister. It's very striking in its own way. So novice, 1889. She is just 16 and clings to her pillar of faith, plump as a duck or a goose, stuffed with buttery prayers. Papa delivers fish, wine, fur-lined boots to the convent turn, and the sisters question after their silent supper how such a child could ever learn the art of suffering on her own. Mother scolds her when she drops her cloth, broom, fork, forgets to drop her gaze, rejoices at a play of light on Mary's statue. Thérèse kneels and kisses the floor. Even now, she's working on her heart's first draft, her young soul proven and rising like dough. So, from a very comfortable upbringing, Thérèse now found herself allocated household chores, caring for the less able sisters in the community, one of whom was notoriously far from comfortable accepting help from such a young novice, and that was Sister St. Peter, and this is a poem for her. So, Sister St. Peter. The elderly nun shakes her hourglass. You there, sister, let's get on with it. Thérèse steps up and helps the hurting limbs into a rhythm of sorts, towards a refectory forever receding. She gets no thanks. She is too quick, too young. The cloister holds its breath. Somewhere in her body, music plays, the fizz of a waltz perhaps, a ripple in the skin of life beyond its walls. The sky is inky blue. The elderly nun, seated at last, struggles with her cutlery. So Thérèse slices the bread and the cheese, and on impulse turns her face to Sister St. Peter's and leans in for a kiss. A little bit of poetic license with that, because I think Thérèse just said she gave her best smile, but I could see it in my mind, so it went in the poem. Okay, so all the sisters helped with the laundry. It was hard manual labour, and not without its hazards. It was very easy to be splashed with dirty water by a careless sister. But Thérèse seemed to find even this experience a kind of conduit of grace. There's the photograph, and this is the poem, Laundry. These are hard days. The sodden sheets, robes, scapulars are scrubbed with salt and ash and now need rinsing. Rolling, beating, rinsing again in the convent's washhouse pool. Every nun is needed. They jostle each other at the water's edge, grip their wooden paddles, plunge their hands into the cold. The heavy fabrics billow and contract. Their fingers burn and freeze. To keep their spirits up, they sing rounds and homemade verses, pummeling, ringing in rhythm. Then Sister Marie-Joseph splashes Thérèse, her neighbour, with sour grey water. She closes her eyes too briefly to be noticed. When she opens them, they shine on Marie-Joseph and her lilting hymn, the blue-white skin of the sister's wrists, the dim reflections of the pool, on everything. So, and I'm now going to Joan of Arc in her prison, which is photo 13. I do apologise if I've misordered. There it is, beautiful poem, a beautiful photograph. So, of course, as contemplative nuns, the Carmelites spent many hours per day in prayer. However, even contemplative nuns have some recreation time each day. They made their own entertainment and would sometimes perform plays written by the sisters themselves. Thérèse known to be creatively talented by the sisters, wrote several plays, and she greatly admired the bravery of Joan of Arc, who at that time had yet to be canonized, and she wrote 2 plays about her. And the second she wrote concentrates on Joan's bravery during the kind of mental trials of her final imprisonment, a theme that we know became increasingly important to Thérèse as she herself faced a trial of faith in her final years too. And this very well-known photograph shows Thérèse in costume playing the part of Joan. And again, it was one of those photos that really caught at my heart a bit. So Joan of Arc in her prison. It's spring, 1895. Thérèse, in the role of Joan, is chained to the sacristy courtyard's high brick wall. There is no sky. She is dressed for the part, full gown marked with fleur-de-lis. Her long hair flows, though not in fact her own. Her wrists are shackled, her head's in her hand. Thérèse as Joan imprisoned, awaiting her final trial, her costume flammable, her heart even more so. Every prayer is so much straw strewn on the hardened earth. The camera's grace holds her to this icon of her mission. The story arc she'll follow to the end, the act of love she's written. Sunlight gleams on the water jar and the brief lines by her side. So I was thinking about the act of oblation to merciful love that Thérèse wrote about the same time as taking a part in this play. All right, so I'm going to go on to another recreation-based poem, which is based on photo 17, Recreation in the Alley of the Chestnut Trees. So if they weren't performing plays, and they normally weren't, the sisters would gather a couple of times a day to chat and to do some light tasks. And this is a very beautiful photograph of Thérèse at an outdoor recreation. She has with her a statue of the child Jesus, and it's a statue that she was particularly responsible for looking after during her time in the convent. So, Recreation in the Alley of the Chestnut Trees, also 1895. In summer, they carry their baskets of work into the chestnut alley, where sunshine warms their faces, hands, habits, and twice a day they get an hour to chat as they sew, draw, paint, or cut tough bread into chunks for the morning soup. Some look at the camera in its box as the slow photos taken, their eyes meet ours across more than 100 sepia years, and they darn and daub and smile at long gone comments. Thérèse stands at the back, an artist's palette in her hand, circling her right arm around the infant Jesus entrusted to her care, instinctively maternal in the midst of all the older women. Her gaze extends beyond the photo's edge. She's 22, has 2 years to live, and the whole stumbling world to gather up and love. Okay, let me move on. A couple of short poems now, and there's no photograph that accompanies them, but the first one is inspired by the secret engraving that Thérèse was discovered to have made on the inside of her last cell door. So she wrote in French, Jésus est mon unique amour, Jesus is my only love, and it was only discovered after her death. On the door. Why did she carve his name on the inside of the door? He is my only love, she wrote, mon unique amour, as though it were a school desk and she a teenage lover, as though she were a prisoner and he elsewhere another, or that this place, this little cell, was where she felt him most, and set to make remembrance in the world of being his host. And another little poem. And in her final summer, again, as I'm sure most of you already know, but asked by Marie de Gonzague, who was prioress again at that time, to continue the spiritual memoir that she'd begun under the request of her older sister Pauline, who was prioress previous to that, and subsequently, so Mother Agnes, as she was known in the Carmel. And Thérèse struggled, as did all the sisters, to be fair, with meagre resources, but of course she had failing health as well, and a dark night of faith, a very painful, difficult to understand, difficult for her to express feeling of a blocked faith, dark night of faith, which she was afraid to share with the sisters generally. And I found the details of this time of her life very poignant. And this is just a little poem, one of several that seemed to write itself. It's just called Little Lamp. Little lamp, whose wick she pulls up with a pin, flickers in the dark night, is a little spark in which she kindles a few more little words. Little glass inkwell in which she spits to make the blackness last a little longer, lets her write her little scraps of faith, traced with ink and blood in the dark June nights. Okay, I can see that I am out of time. So what I will do is just read one more poem, which finishes the book. So I'd like to finish the reading with it as well, and then I'll hand over. And this is called Patron. Aviators, florists, France, those suffering illness or the early loss of parents, priests in their loneliness, sisters, criminals, those lost to faith who wonder how they got there at the table of sinners where there's no wine. Children, the fallen and bruised, the confused, those still waiting for their mission. Those with a burning heart, throat, gut. Those at the full, the youngest, the smallest, the febrile, the arid, the too late, the too soon, all the wounded soldiers, heavy-hearted, leaden-footed, migraine-ridden, doubt-stricken. Anyone who asks for her, sensing the still point in her soul. Anyone who comes across her, craving sweetness, craving answers. Anyone who longs for a smile from the half-open door. She will be your sister, with a shield and a sword and a rose and a whispered word. And I will stop there. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are just so beautiful. They're even more beautiful when you read them, as to when one comes to the book and
thank you so much
for oneself. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about your writing process?
Well, I'm a creative. Well, one of my hats is I'm a creative writing tutor, which, in my experience, is a terrible block to actually writing anything myself. So I do have to make an effort. And in fact, for quite a long time, I was well, I still am a university tutor, but for quite a long time, I had sort of full-time responsibilities, and I could barely think, and I still find it quite difficult. I don't think it ever becomes easy, but I do try. I try to write a little every day. That doesn't always be successful, but I try to do that, and I suppose that I end up writing a little most days, and occasionally I end up writing a lot. Now, whether that has anything to do with quality or not is an entirely different question. But it does something for me You know, I don't think really the dividing line between writing as a sort of self expression, a sort of self nurturing really, and writing as a creative act, I don't think they're as separate as perhaps people like to think. So I try not to worry too much about the creative qualities of it. I try to write what I need to write, although that's a complete mystery to me often until I've actually started writing. I think I'm going to write about something and then I'll
something else.
Yeah, but it's actually doing it feels important. It feels like a sort of discipline in a way, and then sometimes you can feel graced with something that's flourishing there, and other times it's hard work. So
yeah.
Yeah.
What was it about Thérèse that really spoke to you and made you feel you need to do this?
Yeah, well, I've always loved her, and I found out about her as a child, and it's different when you're a child because you don't necessarily think Thérèse is a very young woman. She's someone who's older than you, and I do remember that perspective as someone who is extremely wise and then I've kind of reflected on her on and off for years and years and years, but I think what really set me writing was discovering the archive, the online archive. I mean, I read books about Thérèse as well as her own writing, but the online archive of the Lysia Carmel has the most wonderful resources. It has letters, it has all sort of contextual information, and it has the most beautiful entire catalogue of photographs featuring Thérèse, and also some other photographs of the convent and of some sisters and other people related to the convent after Thérèse, after Thérèse's own life had ended. So I found those photographs almost like icons, to be honest. It wasn't a conscious kind of decision to meditate on them, but there was this feeling that once I'd found them, I found them so moving that I was almost dwelling in them to an extent, as well as dwelling on them. That's how I've sort of explained it to myself. So some of the poems come from reflecting on those photographs. I haven't wanted to just sort of describe them. I've wanted to kind of respond to them to a certain extent. So I think it was coming across that resource and spending a long time just sort of looking at them and feeling yet again connected to this extraordinary saint who seems to let people get to know her somehow, even though her life was at such a distance to ours. So long years of reflection, but are sort of catalysed really by the resources that I came across a few years ago.
So was it a long process writing the poems, in terms, I mean, over a number of months or?
Oh, months, yes, I think months definitely. I haven't confessed this before, actually, but I do have a kind of novel in progress, and I'm not really a novelist, so of course I'm finding it achingly hard. But it's Thérèse is in it. I'll just say that and leave it there. And I'm certainly not sort of boasting about it because I still have much work to do. But partly because that was going a few years ago and is still going. I almost wrote the poems as my own personal reflections at first, and then I realised that I had a project that I really wanted to develop and kind of use my craft as much as I could and work on. So yes, so some months I would say definitely, and letting it rest and then coming back to it and so on. Yeah.
I have to agree with you. It's the most amazing resource. If anybody hasn't ever found it, to go and have a look, because they're just, you wouldn't believe how much there is of Thérèse. And the sisters have just kept everything, and just to see it all within the archive, which they very beautifully share, is a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely beautiful. Yes, yeah.
Heartily recommend it. So.
Yes, it's kind of generous. It feels sort of so generous, you know, you can feel that you're visiting. Well, I mean, I know you have actually visited Miranda, but
yes,
yes, I mean,
yeah.
I haven't had that privilege, but look, because you can look at the map of the cloister and look at old photographs from the time, and it's just it's very lovely, wonderful resource, you know, for poetic reflections as well as research. Yeah.
Is there some particular event in Thérèse's life that really speaks to you, do you think? If you had to choose one, that's a bit mean. But
I would be so challenged to come up with something. I really would. I mean, there are so many little things, you know, that I haven't necessarily written about, but the way I think more general, I mean, I could say, for example, the elevator. I love or the lift. You know, I love that idea. I love it because to me, it contains two different kind of ways of speaking about experience of the love of God. So one is being sort of enfolded and enclosed, and the other is being lifted up. And to me, it sort of puts them together in quite a remarkable way, actually. So there is that, but I mean, that's not everything. There are so many other little examples that I could choose. But I think quality-wise, one of the qualities is Thérèse's ability to kind of see the sort of the possibility of love behind every little thing, you know, and I find that, and I still find that really extraordinary. So that would be the overarching thing, and how can I approach that with my poetry, you know, because poetry is quite a sort of a small sized writing genre, you know, you don't have a lot of space, so you have to sort of touch the heart of whatever it is you want to say. You have to have it in there. so something about that concentrated insight that she has and that I aspire to in my poems is there.
I think she would be quite touched by the thought that it's the elevator that have you ever been to her house at Alençon?
No, I haven't.
They have the most wonderful museum for the house there, and one of the recordings which is just delightful, is her mother. It's of her, ostensibly her mother is sitting sewing in one room, and Thérèse is demanding her mother's attention, and she's obviously been told to go upstairs for something, and she goes up one step at a time, and each time says, "Mama, Mama."
Yeah.
And her mother answers, "Thérèse."
Yes.
So I think to her as well, she's forever trying to move up. So I'm sure that poem about the elevator would be something that would really touch her as well.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing these with us. That's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Michaela, shall we move on to your very different but equally interesting work on Thérèse and your letters to her? Oops. Technology's not working. She's disappeared.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button and I couldn't find it.
That's quite all right.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. Thank you, Sarah. Your poems are just absolutely beautiful. I was feeling a little bit nervous, and I just went way away from the sort of the computer and my desk there. I was right in the photos. It was beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so shall I go ahead and just start?
Yes, please feel free.
Thank you. Okay, so in 2009, I was for most of my life, I really wanted to be an author. And in 2009, I'd taken some time out and I wanted to write a book. And I tried to write about different things, and I felt sort of quite in despair about the fact that everything I was writing about didn't feel right, and you know, I'd start something and I'd stop. One thing that I was consistent with though was that I was writing a diary or a journal, and so what happened was I'd already just started writing the journal, and then I continued writing up until October. So Catching the Roses is all set in 2009. It starts in July 2009 and ends in October 2009. And it consists of 80 letters that I wrote to Saint Thérèse. And it starts off with a journal, and then I come across Thérèse in July 2009, and then I I read the story of her soul, her autobiography. I'm hugely inspired by it, and then I decide I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write my own story of the soul, and that's what I did. So I wrote this memoir, looking back over my life through the lens of having read her book and the insights and what I gained from it. And I was looking back at my own life, or my own soul, if you like. But I also, within the book, I was hugely inspired by the fact that her relics. So when I came across the autobiography, it was because the cathedral was advertising that Saint Therese's relics were coming to Liverpool, or to the UK, including Liverpool, and that was going to happen in the September. So from July till September, I was writing to Saint Thérèse in preparation for the relics coming. So it was, I had a sense that I was preparing. I didn't know what I was, fully what I was preparing for. I knew the relics were coming. I knew they would be coming. That visit was becoming more and more important to me. And as I was writing these letters to Saint Thérèse, it was a preparation. And I think I started to call myself a pilgrim in my letters. But what I'm going to read from you is towards the end of the book. When the relics arrived in the UK, they went throughout the UK over about a month. They came to Liverpool in September. And I don't know all the places that they went or the sequence, but the last place that they went to was Westminster Cathedral in London, and I hadn't planned to go there because I'd venerated the relics in Liverpool and in Salford, but just the day before, I just thought, I felt so close to Saint Thérèse, I felt so connected. I just thought, she's going home and I want to go and see her before she goes home. So I went to Westminster Cathedral, and this is at the end of the book, and this is the excerpt that I'm going to read. So, dear Saint Thérèse, when I arrived at Westminster Cathedral yesterday afternoon, I stood in the piazza and watched the thousands of people milling around and the hundreds of people in the queue waiting to enter the cathedral. I wandered about for over an hour, just absorbing the atmosphere, which was electric. Looking at the huge screen in the piazza, I could see and hear what was happening inside the cathedral. At approximately 8:30, I joined the queue of several hundred. It started at the side of the cathedral and gradually worked its way to the entrance. The other pilgrims in the queue were friendly. We stamped our feet and rubbed our hands together to keep warm in the cold night air. Some seemed to be praying silently, and I prayed, thinking about all the pilgrims as being an individual soul. The feeling of goodwill was apparent in how unreservedly people chatted to each other, and I overheard some deep spiritual conversations which people didn't seem to mind sharing in public. People feel safe here, I thought. recognizing that we are all connected in body and spirit. How much harder it is to relate to each other as spiritual beings when we are in a traffic jam, rushing around the supermarket or at work. I was surprised at the number of children in the queue and wondered how much they would have preferred to have been tucked up in a warm bed, but they seemed to be enjoying their adventure. Indeed, I remembered that in terms of your little way, we are all children. At about 10:30, after a couple of hours in the queue, patience was rewarded with warmer air, beautiful candlelight, the unmistakable smell of the incense, and the sound of ethereal music. The atmosphere of anticipation at reaching the entrance was palpable, and I was just as excited as others seemed to be. Inside the cathedral, the queue of pilgrims filed past the casket. As there were so many people, there wasn't time to stop and pray. But afterwards, there were plenty of empty pews for silent prayer and meditation. I sat down about 11 p.m. and for the next 3.5 hours, I sat and prayed and listened to the intermittent music, prayers and readings. I thought about my life and how that I might have done lots of things, but I haven't achieved much spiritually. Then I thought about your little way and how it isn't the big things that matter, but the ordinary, everyday things, and that these can be offered to God if they are done with love. Then I wondered, what acts, small or large, could I categorize as done in the name of love? And I realized that I have been at times a dutiful daughter and a caring sister, so I offered these and gratitude for my recovery. The music was beautiful and moving, and I felt connected and open to its healing nature. I prayed about stopping and blocking myself and asked for the strength not to do this anymore and for the courage to bring forth the love which I know is within me. I thought about what stops me engaging fully, and I knew the answer. So I prayed for the blessing of deeper trust and confidence in myself, God, and others. At 2:30 a.m., I walked to the hotel, slowed down by stiffened limbs. Although I noticed the cold, it didn't bother me for a second. Eventually, I lay in bed shivering until some warmth seeped through my body and I slept for a couple of hours. At 7 a.m., I returned to the cathedral, and after Mass, I visited the casket for one last time. There was no queue. And after that, I sat in the Holy Souls Chapel, which was in an archway and contained a beautiful altar. In the shadowy darkness, there was a large, beautiful photo of you, surrounded by candles, which bathed your image in the most serene light. I sat at the back of the chapel and prepared myself for the end of my life-changing pilgrimage. As I sat and prayed, I couldn't help noticing people who came into the chapel and walked around. Then I saw a scene which was ordinary, but at the same time so striking. A young, confident, attractive woman came into the chapel holding the hand of a child who looked to be about 4 years old. They looked so alike that I had no doubt that they were mother and daughter. The child's thick, curly blonde hair reminded me of the child on the photos I have of myself at her age. The mother seemed relaxed, looking around, and guided the child by her hand. The child seemed in awe as she looked up and around her. Both mother and child appeared to be completely at ease with each other and their surroundings. But the way the mother held the child's hand made it clear that the mother was lovingly in charge. She led the way and the child followed obediently. While the mother looked at the altar and bowed her head, perhaps in prayer, the child noticed something on the ground. In the candlelight, I couldn't see what it was at first, but eventually I saw it look like a small statue-like figure which had fallen on its side. Without unclasping her mother's hand, the child leaned down and made several attempts to place the figure upright on the ground in front of the altar. But each time it was straightened, it wobbled and fell onto its side again. Perhaps aware of the strain on her arm as she attempted to reach down without letting go of her mother's hand, she made her mother look down to see what she was doing. Her mother watched her trying to straighten the little figure into an upright, stable position for several moments, but didn't intervene. After a few more attempts, the child managed to set the figure upright, standing on its own without falling, and looked up at her mother with a huge smile of accomplishment. The mother smiled back and leaned down so that her face was at the same level as the child's, and whispered into her ear. I didn't hear what the mother said, but the child looked up at her with the most beautiful smile, and the mother gazed back and nodded as if to say, "Go on, go ahead." In an instant, the child bent down and swept up the figure with her free hand. I watched them walk out of the chapel with the little girl clutching the figure to her chest. The mother and daughter did not let go of each other's hand once. I was enthralled at this scene, amazed at how tenacious and focused the little girl was in achieving her goal of setting the small figure straight, and how pleased she looked when she succeeded. I tried to imagine what the mother said to the little girl to make her swoop up the figure, and my heart told me that the mother had said, "Go on, take her, you can have her," and the child had willingly accepted her mother's gift. I watched them leave the chapel until they were no longer visible. My first response was a momentary flicker of shock that the serene couple had possibly just stolen a sacred figure from your holy chapel. But it passed quickly when another thought came to me, so powerfully it pierced my soul, and I felt my heart thumping in my chest. I understood the significance of the little cameo scene with the mother and child. When the girl, without question or resistance, willingly accepted what was offered, I realized there was a deeper meaning and message. It was as if God was showing me that although I have doubted it, I too am being offered a gift, something I have always longed for, and all I need to do is to accept. What is this gift? Am I being invited to receive the gift of the trusting child that you tell us to be? Yes, for sure. But I know the message is much more powerful than that. God knows what I want more than I do. He is telling me about something more important than the child within. God is saying to me, you can have what you want. Don't resist, just accept. I sat and wondered for a few minutes. What is it that I want above all else and feel that I don't deserve? As if internal barriers within my heart were falling swiftly, one after the other, resistances melted away, and all the things that I had ever wanted and never achieved flashed through my mind. One thing that came to mind was my desire to be creative. God knows how much I've wanted to be an author and how much this desire has been inhibited by my fears, false beliefs, and insecurities. I wondered if God is telling me to take care of my inner child, but also to nurture the gift of creativity, which I have used to write these letters. The best way to do that is to follow the example of you, Saint Thérèse the creative. However, my intuition tells me that that's not the full depth of the message. Writing is certainly my heart's desire, but there was something deeper meant by this understanding. I thought for a few minutes about how you have opened my heart, and then I asked you, what is more important than my heart? My prayer was answered when I realized with clarity the name of the deeper place within me. It is my soul. And then with a rush that ran through my veins like liquid, I knew the truth. Above all else, I want to be free of the anxiety I have suffered for most of my life. I want to heal the soul sickness that has blocked love like brooding dark grey clouds and left me lost and longing. I want to know that sacred space within my soul. With this understanding, I felt a huge feeling of release, and then my body relaxed. My mind rested in peace, my heart rejoiced, and my soul soared, and all became one. At that moment, I received the love that does not need to be earned, and gave thanks for the blessings that have been showered upon me. My heart filled with gratitude for my life, gifts, talents, weaknesses, wrongdoings, longings, my past, my present, and my future. All of it. It was as if every single hurt or suffering I had ever experienced had been washed away, leaving me clean, pure, and new like an innocent child. And it was in that moment I was renewed and reborn. I'll leave it there. That's not right till the end of the chapter, but I can see I'm probably running out of time.
No, not at all. I think you should have gone on a bit more, because a bit further on you talk about the wonderful rose that you received from Thérèse.
That's right. When I was on the train. Oh, is it no? Oh yes, I will. Can I just carry on for another couple of paragraphs?
Yes, of course.
I sat in this elevated state for many minutes until my awareness came back to sitting in the chapel. This understanding, whether imagined or real, was so profound that I sat with tears of gratitude and joy trickling down my cheeks. My heart swelled with love and my mind repeated the phrase, "You can have what you want, don't resist, just accept." I never wanted to forget this moment and to keep its truth forever within my heart and soul. I eventually left the cathedral and made my way home from London to Liverpool with the image of the mother now transformed into a symbol of love, and the little girl a symbol of my soul, embedded with me forever. Thank you for another wonderful rose, the rose of recognition that my inner child is not just a lost, troubled child who wants to hide, but a lovingly created soul that wants to go to God as naturally and as innocently as you describe in your little way. My soul will be nurtured by the many different types of love a mother and Heavenly Father will provide. This love will guide and teach my little soul to nurture itself through acceptance, faith, and gratitude. Yours, Michaela. Thank you. Thanks, Miranda, for encouraging me to go to the end. I'm glad I did now.
Well, I just loved your book. I first read it when you sent it to me some years ago, and I've been rereading it again now. And I thought it was both so brave, because you started by saying how difficult you found writing, and you've set out to be a full-time writer, and then there's this terrible block, which I think, I'm sure we all of us who'd like to aspire to writing, and I write other things these days, have felt like that, and I've always wanted to do more. But this process of Thérèse and going to the cathedral and finding out about her and reading Story of a Soul obviously just opened your mind to how you could move your writing forward.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, sometimes you can have sort of great experiences or epiphanies. This has never left me. It stayed with me, and I do like, one of the things I love about Saint Thérèse is her vocation to love. And I was always thinking, you know, what's my purpose? And you know, I wanted to write, didn't know what to write about, but I was so inspired by Saint Thérèse. And then and I've continued. I've written another book. It's not published yet, and also I've my background is in psychology, and I'm very, very interested in the very therapeutic sort of purpose of writing. And there was so much healing, a very immense amount of healing and understanding and letting go. You know, it was so therapeutic. Yeah.
I would recommend everybody should read this book. It's a wonderful story, and your preparation for the relics visits, and then going to three cathedrals in order to see them. Very stoical, standing in these long queues.
Yeah.
What about Thérèse's life do you think spoke to you most particularly?
I think it was very much her vocation to love, like Sarah, I was enchanted when I went. When I went to the cathedral, I had this sort of epiphany, which I meant to mention before. In July, it was actually the feast day of Saint Therese's parents. So I definitely feel that I was very blessed by them as well, because I had this sort of period. I felt so hopeless, and I went to bed and I lay down and I was like, oh, woe is me. And then I sort of had a sleep, and I woke up and I thought, I'm going to go to mass tomorrow. And I went to mass the following day. I hadn't been to mass for a while, and that was when I after mass I went into the bookshop and saw this beautiful photo of Saint Therese. And like Sarah, I was totally, you know, enchanted by this photograph. And there was a photograph on the front of a book that had been written by some Carmelites, and I was just sort of, who is this person? I did know from my Catholic faith as a child, but I just saw it in a completely different light. So I think it was the fact that she wrote Story of the Soul. I think it was the fact that she I know she wrote it through obedience. I know she didn't sort of say, you know, I want to be she wasn't like me. She didn't inspire to be, you know, a best-selling author. But she did want to write. She did want to be creative. She did write. She wrote plays. She wrote poems, as Sarah said. And when I read Story of the Soul, that was it for me. You know, I thought, I'm going to do the same. You know, she's obviously a very holy person. You know, I'm an alcoholic in recovery. For the last 16 years, I was 4 years into my recovery when I started writing, and I thought, I have this healing I need to do, and I'm gonna write these letters. And so that was the inspiration, the fact that she'd written about her life. And I love that, and also that she wanted a vocation. I also love the fact that when she sort of found her vocation, it came across to me that it was like, you know, a sudden quantum change. I know it. My vocation is to love. And then she put all that sort of enthusiasm and energy into it. And I like those moments. I'm very blessed. I've had quite a few moments of those myself, and that really spoke to me as well. And also that I think Sarah sort of explained this very well as well, is the fact that I felt very close, felt close to her. I felt she was listening to me. An unsent letter is a therapeutic tool. So I'd sort of done 80 of those. And somebody said to me jokingly once, you know, did she ever write back? And I do feel that she did. She did not write back, but she did listen, and she did respond to me as well.
Yes, she writes back to all of us, I think, in very different ways at different times. I've certainly found that. If Dan, I'll ask you the same question, like the hard question I asked Sarah, is there just, if you had to choose just one event in her life that really speaks to you, what do you think that would be?
Well, I think it's only a small event. And again, she didn't read this poem, but she's written a brilliant poem about it called Christmas Miracle. I think it's something like that. And I love that, because it's the idea. So I think she'd been to mass and she'd come home, and the tradition was that children would have their Christmas presents in their shoes. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
And she overheard her dad saying, oh, let's hope this is the last year that we're going through this, or something like that. And she overheard it. And I think that she knew that the family, my understanding was that she knew that the family were going to, you know, we're expecting her to be upset and sensitive and to be wounded by this comment. And she consciously sort of reframed it and thought, no, I'm not going to do that. This is my understanding. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, you know, be more mature than that, or I'm going to learn from this. So in psychology, we call that sort of reframing, which is really good for us to help us, you know, look at things differently. So she took a different perception. And I really, really love that as well, because it was a really good example for me. I understood what she was doing. She didn't credit herself with it. I think she, you know, she saw it as a conversion. Is that the right word? Or a miracle? She saw it as a miracle. And having been in recovery and being in recovery and working with people in recovery, you know, we need those kinds of miracles. You know, the times where we think, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to change. And I do love that moment. And so to me, it was like a quantum change moment. I love quantum change because it's real and it happens. And so, yeah, I think that would be one. But like Sarah, there's so many others.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short 15-minute break. No, 5-minute break. I'm not having 15 minutes, sorry. 5-minute break in case anyone wants a cup of tea. And then we'll come back and Sarah and Michaela will chat together about writing, Thérèse, whatever topic they fancy. And please do, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll collect those and have those afterwards. So we'll come back at 15:15.
Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you. So I think it's 1:15, so we'll make a start again. If anybody hasn't yet seen a copy of either of the books, they are available from the Society of the Little Flowers website, as well as other places. But we have got copies of them, and they are available, both Sarah's volume and Michaela's, and I think Matt has put the links in the chat to exactly the place on the website. Otherwise, it's littleflower.org.uk is where you want to go. Look under religious items and books, and you'll find them right. Well, actually, you'll find them right at the top of those page, the first page of our little shop on the website. And if you'd like your own copy, I would heartily recommend both of them. They've been by my bed for some time recently, as well as having copies in the office as well, which is lovely. Sarah and Michaela.
Hi.
I have a little question to start us off. What do you think is the relevance of St. Thérèse in our lives today?
That's a good question.
Yes, it is another good good question.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. There's one, obviously, thinking about what we've all been through over the last year or so.
Yeah.
There's one thing that I've experienced with Thérèse is how hopeful she is. And she never gave up. She's very, very persistent, and she never wavered. I know. They're my first thoughts. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, she was a very, very strong person, far more so than perhaps the sort of the first wave of sort of writing about her let on. She was there's an intense sweetness to it, but there's a great strength as well. And I thought also that over the last year with the pandemic and the lockdown and all the anxiety and the illness, it as well as many other things, it sort of brought in to me that with sharp relief about how confined an enclosed life can feel. Obviously, if you've got a calling for it and you've deliberately sought out life in an enclosed community, that's different to being sort of locked down, you know, and only advised to go out for an hour a day for exercise, as we were at the beginning of the first lockdown last year. But that sense of living within confines, living within reduced circumstances, it made me realize how difficult it is and how it kind of forces a kind of internal focus. You have to reflect more on your inner life, because there's not so much by way of distraction going on out there, and also the sort of awareness of our own physical frailty and our mortality. I mean, it's something that our 20th, 21st century culture doesn't really like to think about too much, but in the 19th century there were sort of waves of epidemics, weren't there? There was a wave of influenza when Thérèse was in the Carmel in Lisieux, and some of the sisters died from it. So it kind of brought that up sharply for me as well. That the strength that she had was in the face of very confined circumstances and awareness of illness and mortality. And still she was, as you say, hopeful and full of love rather than fear.
Yeah. Yes. And I think also as well, if she was very brave, like you said, that she was very a strong person. I really believe. I really agree with that. But she was very brave as well, to think about sort of, I don't know what the equivalent would be today, or probably going, I imagined, you know, if one of us, say, wanted to go to the Prime Minister and say, you know, will you change your mind about this, or what do you think about that? Because there has been this dialogue going on between government and us lot, you know, waiting to hear the new guidance on lockdown and things like that. But she was so brave to go and speak to the Pope and say, you know, please, will you support me in what I want to do? And I could, you know, it'd be hard to imagine. I couldn't imagine. I would never do that. I'd never have the courage to go to Boris Johnson or someone like that and say, please change your mind. Or, you know, it's very relevant, that sort of idea that somebody would go to a figure like that, that everyone was saying, well, you can't speak and you can't say this, and she did. I can, you know, if she wasn't within the convent, I should imagine she would have been a great advocate. And if she'd have chosen a different path, a different career path, I imagine that she would have been, you know, a really strong, powerful woman. I mean, she was within the convent, but whatever she chose to do, and I think she's a good example for that.
Yeah, so the audacity of it is the quality that's sort of really amazing and admirable, isn't it? Yes, yeah, she wasn't particularly cowed by kind of the social structures and hierarchies out in the world, when in comparison there was this inner conviction that she had a vocation, and she needed to follow that. So yes, yeah, and that gave her great strength.
One wonders how many times she had to ask her father until he was completely worn down and said, yes, okay, I'll take you.
Yes, I can imagine that as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, actually, part of her vision was not to stay forever in the Carmel. She did want to be a missionary, and sadly,
yes, that's true, isn't it? They did send some sisters to some of the Carmels that were founded in Southeast Asia. I think she was going to go to Saigon, as it was, and yeah, amazing.
That was her greatest ambition, and
yeah,
the nearest she got to it was writing to the priest who did go.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
pray for him. But
yes. Except, of course, her relics now have been
indeed
all over the world,
whizzing around the world endlessly.
Yeah,
you must wonder whether she's ever going to have a rest, poor girl.
Yeah. Well,
I've never seen anything. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say, I think she said she didn't want to have a rest.
That's true. Yes, she's going to spend her life sending us these showers of roses. So.
I've never seen anything like what I saw when the relics were in the UK. It was certainly in Liverpool. There were queues and queues and queues. At one point, they had to close the cathedral for health and safety reasons. And there were people sort of outside wanting to get in. I'd never seen anything like that. So she obviously, there's really something very strong that, you know, it does make her very relevant today, because I don't think people would do that, would they, if they didn't believe that, you know, she was really relevant or offering something. And it could be something different to everybody, but she certainly does connect with us as we are.
I think that's it. She has no expectation of us, in a way. So it doesn't matter what we do, she will always be there for us. I think that's certainly what I always feel about her. And I think certainly some of the people I observed when I was at Aylesford for the relics visit, so many of them, when they were telling their stories, saying they hadn't been near a church for years and years, and yet they heard the relics were coming of Thérèse, so they came.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it was something that the mainstream press found quite difficult to rationalize. You know, I remember seeing sort of the odd article in the Guardian and whatnot saying, well, this thousands of people or hundreds of people are queuing up at Westminster, and not quite knowing what to say about it, because she doesn't quite fit into that sort of rash narrative. So much. Of course, the relics have been to Scotland a couple of years ago, haven't they? Yes. I wasn't able to go and see them, but
they have produced, as they did of the relics in the UK, they have produced a little video of it, which actually is coupled with a really lovely video of Thérèse's life as well. And yes, I mean, just watching that again, just again, everybody flocking to see her and just wanting to be with her, and to touch her and give her more roses so that she can spread them around further.
Yes. I was very honoured. I was a steward at the cathedral when the relics came at Liverpool Cathedral, and I was right at the back of the cathedral, and initially just sort of directing people, and it felt like such a gift, because I was asked, did I want to go and wipe the kisses off the casket off the perspex. I was just so delighted with myself. My yellow.
Do you know, I love that. Yeah, I love that part of your memoir, Michaela. I think that's just a really beautiful image, that you're collecting all these kisses in a cloth. You know, it's just beautiful, like a looking like a rose itself. Yeah, very lovely. I wanted to say, I mean, I enjoyed your memoir immensely. I loved it, but I particularly liked the letter format, actually, Michaela, because it just seems particularly suited to Thérèse. I know she's best known for her memoir, Story of a Soul, and she wrote poems and the plays as, consciously sort of creative writing, but she was a really prodigious letter writer for the time, and considering the brief time she had when she was in the CUM as well. So reading the collected letters, I think there's a 2-volume edition out now, but substantial number of them. But she was a very, very gifted letter writer. She was able to kind of connect with people through the letter, and the letter is a kind of small form as well, isn't it? It's not a sort of massive ambitious project. It's a small form. She wrote it in the small periods of time that she had, and again a sort of concentrated form that she was able to express herself and touch the person that she was addressing, and also touched all of us who read the letters afterwards. So I really like that about your book, that it was structured as letters. It seemed really, really appropriate. Worked well.
It was kind of intuitive, but I haven't read many of her letters, actually. I think at the time I was aware of them, and I didn't want to, perhaps sometimes I didn't want to be too what's the word, influenced, because obviously I was writing and I wanted it to feel original. I didn't want to pick up anything. When you're doing something like that, you have to sort of, you want to let your own subconscious and creativity flow. But now's the time. I think I'm glad you've said that, because I'm definitely going to read her letters, more of her letters, definitely.
Yeah, some of them are so moving. It's like she's talking to you, you know, like, because she is addressing someone, and she is often addressing, it's often a family member, but she's addressing often her sister Celine, and then quite often her cousin Mary Guerin, who subsequently entered the Calm as well, but, you know, addressing their anxieties and offering consolation, but in a very sort of, you know, as a friend, as a sister, literally as a sister, rather than a you know, a sort of professional giving instructions. So that essence of her, where she gets alongside you and kind of is with the person that she's talking to, comes through very well in them.
Yeah, that's a new insight for me. I'm definitely going to sort of follow that thread for sure.
I think she was, I think it must have been about that quality about her that when they decided to make her the novice mistress, really, I think that ability to walk alongside people it must have been the best way, really, that she was able to guide these other young women, given that she was no age herself.
Yeah.
That's right, and she was younger than a lot of them as well, wasn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I know.
Yes, and she was never officially novice mistress. So again,
no,
it didn't have that. Yeah, so she could just be walking alongside.
Yes. Yeah. It was that was one thing that struck me, and it particularly struck me when have you read Jennifer Moorcroft's book, Thérèse and Her Sisters?
Yes.
Yes. When reading that as well, and seeing the relation, really getting a feel for the relationship of her with other young women, and how she touched them, which in the same way that really she touches us in all sorts of different ways when we read her words. And
Yes, and her letter, I mean, going back to letters and the sort of unofficial, the accompaniment is sort of very much. If you've read her, if you get the chance to read the letters that she wrote to one of the seminarians, you know, that became a missionary priest, Maurice Bellier, Abbé Bellier, they're really, really amazing. Considering she was so ill, she's dying at the time that she wrote them, but still she was more concerned for her correspondent.
It must have been also such a relief for her as well, in actually projecting in that way, and reaching out to them, given that her own crisis of faith that she was having at that time as well. But yes, you're right. They are just so beautiful. Very much to be read, and
I'm excited to do that now.
I don't know whether we've got any questions from the audience. There's been all sorts of lovely comments coming up. Has anyone particularly want to put their hand up and ask a question? And Matt can unmute you. There are some wonderful comments about both your works. Your lovely poems, so moving, vivid and illuminating.
Thank you.
And Michaela, that you've got such a wonderful, amazing memory for detail. Actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you actually was, did you write sort of every night, you know, at the end of each night as you'd done it?
Yeah.
You know, as you've been in the cathedral, did you sort of come home and think, I've got to do this before I go to sleep?
Yes, because yes, I did, and some of the letters were actually written in my journal. Some were sort of written as something separate, and it was sort of bringing them together. But at the time, I don't do it so much now, but at the time I was, my sort of writing process was, I would do something called morning pages. I'm sure Sarah's nodding.
Yeah, Julia Cameron. Yes. I aspire to do them, Michaela, but I'm very intermittent in my achievement. So
they so help me so much. So the idea is that you write a couple of pages as soon as you wake up, and it's to get past the inner critic, I think, is the idea. And you just write anything, doesn't matter, but it just gets you into the flow. So I was doing that as well. So I was quite disciplined. And then sometimes they were just on a bit of paper, you know, quick bit of paper. Sometimes they were sort of in my journal, but yeah, I did as I went along. I was writing, you know, continuously. And also there was this therapeutic thread as well that was going along as well. So especially when I was looking back on my sort of earlier life, I was sort of making sense of things that had happened in my childhood, and there was that sort of process going on as well. So some of it was the it's called expressive writing, the Penny Baker paradigm, the writing for trauma. So the idea that you just write for 20 minutes over a week about an incident, and you know, it has amazing therapeutic evidence-based sort of benefits. So I was doing that as well.
We've got a, oops, so it's disappeared from me. There is a question for Sarah from Gillian Guy, who'd like to know if it was difficult to choose the individual events and scenes for the poems, and how much did the photographs influence your choices?
Good question. Yeah, I didn't write them in chronological order, and to a certain extent I didn't always know what I was going to write before I wrote it. So and I think often with poetry, I don't think it's sort of me in particular, but often poems do seem to almost write themselves. You know, you have to take a sort of leap to get started, but then sometimes actually what the poem wants to be isn't what you think you're going to go and write about. So I did have some of that, and I suppose because I have known Thérèse for a long time, but I was reflecting anew on various aspects of her life and discovering through the website, and you know, rethinking and revisiting. It was almost like some quality or some event would just be on my mind or be on my heart, perhaps, or a combination of the two. And I think, right, I'm going to try to do a little bit of writing this evening, because that's often I'm trying to do a little bit in the evening, even if I've done nothing creative all day. I try and do that, and I'm not always sure what's going to occur. And the photographs, yeah, I mean, the photographs I just found incredibly moving, as I've said. So not all of my poems are in responses to the photographs. Not all of the photographs propelled me to writing a poem. So, and those that did, as I said, it was a process of kind of dwelling in them as much as just kind of looking at them and noting down what was going on in them. It was more of a kind of a felt process rather than an observational exercise. So I think I've gone way away from what the question was, but yeah. Yeah, so it wasn't really difficult, but then again, it didn't really feel like I was choosing. It was more like the events chose, you know, were just rose in my mind to write about. I was touched by them and I wanted to write about it. And the book was, the poems were not, as I said, they were not in chronological. I didn't start at the beginning and end at the end. It was a more mysterious process than that, haphazard, perhaps you can say. And I did see a comment earlier from someone who said that you know, in the Bible there's no visual images of Jesus and so on, and would my response or our response to Thérèse be the same without the images? And it's a good question, because I think the photographs are part of her, part of the way she can catch at the heart. She and Saint Bernadette of Lourdes were the first women saints, anyway, well-known women saints, to actually be photographed and their images saved and distributed. Although, having said that, Therese's photographs were not widely known for many years. So her writing was known before her photographs were known. So we had some pictures, but they didn't particularly capture, arguably, they didn't particularly capture things that were very moving about the realness of the photos. So it is part of her, but I don't think it's everything by any means. I mean, there are many saints who lived and inspired and sort of touched the soul before Thérèse and before photography and so on. And I've found connections and wanted to write to and about other saints. So it wasn't just the photographs.
I love the way you describe that, the dwelling in a photo. And I think at those times, you know, when you take a photo, when we take one now, we just go click. I think in those times there was a lot more of a process, wasn't there? You had to stand very still and stuff like that.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't know whether that sort of makes a difference, but I know exactly what you mean. And when you read your poems, there is that felt sense of something, as well as the words. It's hard to describe, that there is a felt sense of, you know, for me, your poems were like, feel very pure, but not, I don't mean naive, I mean pure in the sense of, you know, as something really aspirational. You know, the true meaning of purity, I think.
Thank you. I did. Well, I consciously realised, I don't know if I consciously did, but I did feel that they needed a fairly simple style. You know, I was going for lucid rather than double sonnets or, you know, anything else that I might have tried in another, you know, in another kind of project. I mean, I've had my fair share of it. You know, I write experimentally and sort of play about with all sorts of forms, but for this, again, the forms sort of chose themselves, but they wanted to be not simplistic, but I wanted to have them simple and I wanted to have them lucid, to sort of let the light shine through them, if you like. Yeah.
And it certainly does. Certainly does. They're beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have a question from Maisie. Who?
Yeah, I was wanting to ask, how did you either of you feel a responsibility in your poetry, your prose, to kind of make St. Teresa real? Now she can come across, or when you were kind of taught about her, you know, keeping everything inside and not making a fuss about anything, but actually St. Teresa had a lot of terrible darkness, didn't she, and real crisis of faith, you know, and that I think makes her really relevant to people today. So, you know, did you want to try and get that across, of that aspect of her?
That's a really good question. I felt like I could reveal my insecurities and, you know, negativities and darkness, I felt that I could reveal them to her in the letters. I didn't sort of in the letters write so much about how she must have felt. I felt it, but I felt I could write about it like she was alongside me, like we were talking about earlier.
Yes, yes. Yes, a responsibility. Yes, perhaps so. I mean, she's so far from the kind of happy, sort of easy, sort of sugary sanctity that perhaps people have, you know, people who don't know her might assume. And she struggled and suffered so much that yes, I did write about that as well. And in a way, I worried about. Exploiting isn't the right word, but I always worried about making a poem out of a young woman suffering. I worried a little bit about that. You know, how far am I just using something that was so painful and real in order to make a poem. So I did kind of worry. I mean, that's the sort of thing poets do worry about, I know, from time to time. And in the end, I just had a sort of letting go process. That's the only way I can say it, really. I just thought, well, I'm not going to worry. I'm going to get out of the way and just write the poems that want to be written. So I just decided to trust that and write them. So yeah. But I felt that I wanted to write. I did want to write. I wanted to write about her, you know. I wanted to use whatever abilities, intermittent abilities I have to write about her and allow her to be known by more readers. I did have that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Maisie. Does anyone else like to ask a question before we have to wrap up?
Flown by.
Yes, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some very lovely comments in the chat. I hope you're both reading them as well.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of that with us this evening. It's been absolutely wonderful. I'm so grateful to both of you. And it's so lovely to be able to talk about Thérèse, always.
Yeah.
And especially in a sort of forum like this. I spent sometimes time just trying to justify, well, not exactly justify, but justify my life and my by trying to explain Thérèse to people. And I think what I need to do is send them both, anybody who asks me that question in the future, I will be sending them 2 books and telling them to read those. And then they can go to Story of a Soul and discover why we all love her so much.
Yeah.
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 Thank you both.
Thank you
very much indeed. And thank you for everybody for joining us this evening. It's been a really lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.